Hospitals are at their absolute limit.
The entire world is under siege.
The death toll has now risen to more than 51,000.
COVID-19, the coronavirus, respects no country, no population, no measure of social class, race, or identity. It spreads under its own power, killing hundreds of thousands, bringing economies to their knees. Its cure is uncertain. The future is unknown. But in the face of this extraordinary pandemic, the human spirit confronts the challenge head on. Scientists research, healthcare workers save. Tonight, we explore the challenges humanity and the natural world face and observe the bravery of those countless people doing their best to save us. We celebrate the people who risk their lives for ours. We cherish those we've lost in the battle, and we ask you to donate to our most precious resource now, our frontline healthcare workers, the soldiers in this war against coronavirus. Hope, resilience, human spirit. This is Live MedAid.
Now, some of you watching right now may have had some first-hand experience with the virus. Aliya Jasmine, our environmental host, has as well, and our sympathies are with her as they are with you. I dare say, though, I am still jealous of her assignment and who she got to interview.
Hey everyone, bonjour. I'm Aliya Jasmine. I'm a television host and producer and an environmental journalist, and I am thrilled to be part of Live MedAid today and support Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, in their efforts on the front line to battle the COVID-19 pandemic. I lost my aunt to this virus last week, so it's deeply personal to me. Now, I've traveled all over the world covering social justice and environmental issues. Many of you may have seen my work on MTV News or Discovery Channel in Canada or on NBC4 News here in Los Angeles. And you might be asking, what does the environment have to do with this pandemic? Well, I am going to get to the heart of that with legends like Dr. David Suzuki, Dr. Wade Davis, and I am talking to a photojournalist who has gone undercover in the wet markets in China. So merci, thank you so much for supporting and watching Live MedAid, and I will see you later in the show.
If you have Netflix, chances are you've watched the show Pandemic.
Now we throw it over to our Live MedAid co-host, environmental journalist, Aliya Jasmine. Aliya, take it away.
Indeed, as we are all staying indoors, the earth is flourishing on the other side of our windows. So let's take a deeper dive into this connection between the environment, the pandemic, and us, the humans across the globe who are dealing with this new reality. We are so lucky to have our next two guests with us here today. The National Geographic Society named Wade Davis as one of the explorers for the millennium. He is an anthropologist, an ethnographer, and a filmmaker whose work has taken him from the Amazon to Africa to the Arctic, doing the kind of work in the field that movies are made of, and in his case actually have been, while immersing himself in cultures and environments around the world that most of us will only ever read about. And in addition to being my childhood hero, which in itself is quite notable, David Suzuki is widely recognized as a world leader in sustainable ecology. He is famous for his legendary series, The Nature of Things, which aired in over 40 countries. Among countless awards, he notably received a UNESCO Prize for Science and a United Nations Environment Medal. And perhaps most notably, he has been stuck on an island during this quarantine with only 3 pairs of knickers. Welcome, David.
Good to be here.
David, I'm going to start with you. Conversations about the connection between COVID-19 and the climate crisis are happening within the science circles. Surely I'm reading them. However, outside of the scientific community, many people who consume mainstream media are facing what I like to call an intellectual gap. So let's take a step back, and on a very macro level, what's the connection between COVID-19 and the climate crisis?
Well, I think they all reflect the fact that humanity is in a very unique position in the history of life on this planet. There's never been a single species of animal or plant able to modify the world in the way that we're doing today. That's why this is called the Anthropocene epoch, a period in geological history when we are the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the planet. And in that position, you know, we are the most numerous vertebrate on the planet. There's never been so much yummy human protoplasm as there is today, waiting for something to, and life is very, very imaginative and finds ways of exploiting opportunities that arise. And, you know, over 60% of the diseases that affect humankind come from animals. And as we push our frontiers further and further into wild areas, what we do is we force animals together that normally don't inhabit the same area. And so the opportunity of viruses to jump from one species to another, much greater. I mean, who could have imagined that we would have a virus, a pandemic, from a virus that leapt from a bat to a pangolin? I'll bet you most people in the world have never even heard of a pangolin.
I agree with you.
That creature, because of humankind's huge numbers and our further encroachment on the natural world, these kinds of things like hantavirus and dengue and HIV, they're going to keep popping out because of our intrusion around the world. And of course, the impact of that humanity's great success is reflected by the climate crisis, which is the way that we behave in burning fossil fuels.
Well, you know, just to follow up on what David said, I mean, I think the great lesson of this and the great hope is that maybe at last we'll discover that we really are a biological species living on a living planet. And when we talk of climate change, we see it as humanity's problem, which it is, but it critically wasn't caused by humanity. It was caused by a narrow subset of humanity with a particular way of thinking about their place in the planet. You know, we forget that all cultures are faithful to their own interpretations of reality. They're all products of their own history. Just because we are dominant with this kind of modern paradigm doesn't imply that that's the norm. In fact, when you look around the world, cross-culturally, the way we think of our place in the planet is completely the anomaly, particularly an important point in our history. When we tried to liberate ourselves from the tyranny of absolute faith in the Enlightenment, when Descartes said that all that existed was mind and mechanism, in a single gesture, he de-animated the world such that science would make a house cleaning of belief. The triumph of secular materialism became the conceit and the defining identity. The idea that the flight of a bird could have meaning, that a mountain could be a deity, was dismissed as being ridiculous. And that way of thinking ended up defining how we interacted over the last 300 years, living on the ancient sunlight of the world as we reduced the earth itself to a commodity. We think of that as the norm because it is dominant, but dominance and ubiquity do not imply normalcy. Most cultures have a very different way of thinking about the earth based on reciprocity, not a sort of self-conscious ethic of conservation, but a far more subtle intuition, the idea that the earth itself is only because it's filtered through the human imagination. Animals and plants aren't inert. They're not props on a stage upon which only the human drama unfolds. On the contrary, most people in one way or another view plants as simply people in another dimension of reality. The main dynamic that defines the majority of human beings' interaction with the earth is not exploitation, not extraction, it's reciprocity. The basic idea that the earth owes me its bounty, but I in turn owe the earth its well-being. And that dynamic, simple as it sounds, when played out in ritual and myth, becomes almost a land management plan for the well-being of the planet and of the people themselves. We are the anomaly. And the great lesson of something like COVID is that just maybe we'll wake up to that and we'll realize that these other ways of being, these other ways of thinking are not quaint and colorful, but they're fundamental. And they put the lie to those of us in our own society that David deals with all the time, who say that we cannot change, as we all know we must change the fundamental way in which we live on this planet.
You know, I am a big fan of Wade's analysis, and he's influenced me. I can see for most of human history, we lived within a world in which we knew we were one part of a very complex web of relationships with other animals, with plants, with air, water, soil. We understood that, and we acknowledged that our well-being and survival depended on that. That's called an ecocentric way of seeing our place in the world. We are a part of a much more complex system. But we've really, in the last few hundred years, embraced the notion it's all about us.
Because the earth is alive, vibrant, responsive. We all are connected. Everything we know about physics and chemistry and life itself, the very water in our rivers is never created nor destroyed. When you drink water from your faucet, you're drinking the very same water that slaked the thirst of the dinosaurs. And so we do live on this living planet. And if we realize that, we will and continue to do the kinds of destructive, unnecessary deeds that we do, we will continue to have it backfire upon us, as is the case of the COVID crisis.
You know, the idea of interconnectivity is not new. It's not a new concept, but I think that we have, in this pandemic, through social media, seen minute-to-minute, brightly colored graphics showing the spread of COVID-19, how quickly and rapidly it's changing. And I think for the first time, the majority of the population has simultaneously kind of experienced this, you know, viral global contagion and seen it in a very conceptual way. And so do you think that this experience point, like a new starting point to reframe how we all coexist?
Well, one hopes. I mean, as an environmentalist, every ecological crisis I see, whether it's forest fires in Australia that have lit an entire continent, whether it's a crisis of Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane, one of the other hurricanes, you keep hoping, oh, this is a moment, this is a moment. Unfortunately, the economy always looms far larger and far more important. And we had a crisis in 2008 with a meltdown that the banks caused to try to get the action going and get it back to the way it was before the economic meltdown. Well, if you're trying to maintain the status quo all the time, you're going to do everything you can to avoid taking this step. Yeah, I think having an opportunity it's a huge opportunity. But you see people now that just want that economy going back again, and they want to go shopping and spending and doing the same old thing.
Yeah, I mean, the fluidity of our memory and our capacity to forget is probably the most haunting human trait. I mean, how many of us remember that in the lifetime of our great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents, buffalo outnumbered people in North America, or that in the lifetime of in my case, my grandfather even, passenger pigeons were 40% of birds in North America, flocks of 2 and 3 billion birds black in the sky over cities like Cincinnati. At this that defines economic well-being as perpetual growth on a finite planet, when is somebody going to realize that isn't on, that our economic projections should be circles, not arrows? Certainly we're going to come out of this with a moment of possibility, pregnant with hope. I mean, never in history has the entire warning us about climate change before anyone was even speaking about it. It's been difficult to get traction on that issue because of the dominance of the economic system, and because the impact of climate change isn't something you can touch. It doesn't threaten you right now, it seems. That's how people perceive it. But this is different, right? And certainly these kinds of moments, I mean, history flows beneath us. We never know its direction, its trajectory, but certainly something like this is going to have some immediate sociological impacts, which will be dramatic.
Thanks so much, gentlemen. I hope our next conversation is not virtual, but in real life, hopefully over a drink or maybe one of the plants from Wade's research. Thanks so much for being here and being part of Live MedAid. Now I want to pivot this conversation and dive a little further into environmental implications, specifically the link between COVID-19 and wildlife. So through this pandemic, the world is being introduced to wet markets. It's a term that is now part of our global lexicon. But award-winning photojournalist Paul Hilton has been undercover in these wet markets for years. He's been showcasing the illegal wildlife trade and spent a ton of time with pangolins. They are the most widely trafficked mammal in the world, which many scientists believe may be implicated in this pandemic. Hi, Paul. It is so nice to see you again. And I feel like at this point we are better friends virtually than we are in real life. So, Paul, for many people, the concept of a wet market was unfamiliar prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. But now the term wet market is part of the global lexicon. Now, you've worked in wet markets in China for many years, including markets in Wuhan, where this pandemic is suspected to have started. So can you tell us exactly what a wet market is and what you've seen there, like boots on the ground?
Yeah, I started working in China sort of in the early 90s and all the way up through to sort of present day. But wet markets, when I actually first went into a wet market, there was these restaurants running alongside of the wet market. And I said, or my translator asked, what's on the menu? And the restaurant, he replied back saying, everything in the sky, everything in the land, everything in the ocean. And there was just cages after cages of birds and mammals and seafood. And that was in the early 90s. And I know they have changed somewhat. A lot of the sort of mammals are not there in the numbers that they were in the past. But yeah, these markets just, you walk into them and they're really dark. It just feels so everything in my body's telling me not to go into these markets. And I know I've got to go in. I want to document these places as to show people like yourself. But just getting in and getting out, you just do your work and you come out and just feel just filthy and you just want to literally get back to your hotel room and wash your clothes, shower. And it just takes a long time to get those images out of your head. You know, it's sort of, some of them stay with me for a long time. Yeah.
So, you know, I think we're hitting on this point of being unhygienic and being dark. And I'm curious because a lot of leaders are saying right now that wet markets in and of themselves aren't the actual problem. It's the few of them that deal with exotic wildlife and with the live animal trade, because this leads to less sanitary conditions and higher risk for zoonotic diseases, meaning, you know, these diseases that jump from animals to humans, like coronavirus. So is it unfair to paint all wet markets with the same negative brush? What would you say, since you've actually been in them and worked in them?
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely there's different levels, different caliber of wet market. Like there's a lot of seafood markets where they have fish and they might have abalone and other species of seafood, and that they're managed quite well. It's and I do believe that a lot of people in these areas, say for Indonesia and China, these markets are the only place where they can actually get fresh produce. They don't have big, deep freezers. They don't have a lot of access to fridge space and freezers like we do in the West. So there needs to be a place to get fresh produce. There needs to be much more regulation just to clean up the whole industry. And I know a lot of the markets, specifically in Hong Kong, the wet markets, they've closed them down, or they've actually moved them indoors and got them in some order so cages can be cleaned. I'm just talking about poultry and stuff. So it's much more hygienic. And I think China and Southeast Asia, I think will be foolish to think these markets they're just gonna close down these markets. There's too many people that need these markets and use these markets. And we're talking millions of people.
Yeah, Paul, I guess like my final question, just to wrap this all up for you, with you, is how do we reconcile this issue, like of unified standards for for conservation, for animal protection, for food safety, for climate change. I mean, with all these diverse cultural perspectives around the world, how do we reconcile this?
Every country just needs to really look at their issues, look at the sort of the trade in wildlife crimes, and ultimately how we interact with all other species, domestic and wild. Ultimately, you know, there's no pandemic ever come from broccoli. It's like there's bird flu and swine flu and now COVID-19. It's all from the mistreatment of animals, and each country needs to really address that, because it's going to happen again. It's happened throughout history. It's like now we really need to pay attention how we've been mistreating other species.
And what a great way to end this, because sorry, go ahead.
No, just everybody really needs to think about their diet. And I know people don't really, they find it a personal attack if you discuss people's diets, but it's ultimately that's what it comes down to. We all can make a difference.
Right. And I think, I think that's just such a great way to end this conversation, Paul, because, you mentioned it's going to happen again if we don't. And surely your own work and covering zoonotic disease after zoonotic disease with boots on the ground in a lot of these places where you see wildlife coming into such close contact with humans is a testament to that. We've seen it happen so many times before, and history is repeating itself right now. So hopefully this will open up everyone's eyes and change their ways. And thank you for your reporting, Paul. Thank you for being part of Live MedAid today.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Aliya, for that story. This pandemic has touched so many people around the world. I know you lost somebody close to you to COVID-19. So first of all, everyone here at Live MedAid wants to send our condolences. We want you to know how much we appreciate you being part of this today, especially at such a difficult time. Would you be able to share some of your experience with the people watching here today on Live MedAid?
Comfortable talking about it. I think it's important. I think as a journalist, it's interesting when you become a part of your story, and that's indeed what has happened to me. I've been covering this pandemic while it was traveling through Europe, through the lifeline of this pandemic, and well before it reached North America. I talked to people in France and in Spain about how there wasn't enough room for patients in the hospitals, not enough equipment. And I talked to people in Italy who were telling me that their loved ones dead. So those kind of stories were so heartbreaking to tell as a journalist, but so important to tell. But indeed, it's a whole other thing, when it strikes you personally, and your own life mimics the stories that you've told. And that's what happened to us. My aunt was deemed someone who was older, and she was diabetic, and so she wasn't admitted into ICU. And she had to spend her last days in isolation. Her immediate family wasn't allowed to go in and see her and be there for her in her last days or her last moments. For my mom and my aunts and uncles, it was heartbreaking because they're all dispersed all over the world. They, as children, had to leave East Africa as refugees, and they all dispersed all over the world and started their lives. But every year, they're very, very, very close, and all 11 of them and their families all get together every year for a reunion, and this is their first sibling who passed away. And so they all wanted to be there and hold her hand and pray for her and be there in her last moments, and they weren't able to. And indeed, even with the funeral, I mean, can you even imagine the fact that we had to have a funeral on Zoom? And we're lucky to even have the ability to have a funeral on Zoom. Most did not have that, but even that was odd. You felt distant and far away, and only about 5 people were allowed in the funeral. They all had to stand very far apart from each other. It was in a very sterile kind of room for hygienic reasons. And then, the people who were there were all wearing masks, and the pallbearers that usually would lift up the casket were not able to do that, again, for distance reasons. So they had to put her on wheels, and then one person rolled them out. So it was really heartbreaking for all of us to see. Also, after a funeral, I think the whole family kind of gets together and they have prayers and they mourn together and grieve together. And that didn't happen. The Zoom just went off and everything was over. So, I mean, we are all looking forward to, you know, a year from now or however long this takes to all get together and to have a memorial and to honor her. But in the meantime, I want to thank all the doctors on the front lines who are trying to stop what my family had to experience, trying to stop that for so many other families. And I think for all of us, we have a responsibility to help those doctors by doing what we can. That includes, you know, all of us staying in self-quarantine as long as we can. If we're able to work from home, to wear masks when we're outside, to wear gloves, and to indeed stay as hygienic as possible through all of this. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of this, for honoring my aunt, and also for thanking the doctors who are out there on the front lines. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Aliya, for sharing such a personal story, one that too many people around the world know all too well. And now with our final musical performance of the night,
we'll see more of Brian May with Queen and Adam Lambert. And then there's Ed Robertson of the Bare Naked Ladies. He'll be singing a song I know a lot of you sung along to every week for 12 straight years. We've got one of my favorites, Metric, as well as Nigerian sensation Bombino, guitarist Jesse Cook, and Alex Cuba. Now, someone else I want to introduce you to who is making a difference is the LA-based Third Rock Hip Hop. You could say they're in the green rap genre, making music about protecting the environment. Here's Third Rock Hip Hop.
I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe. Do you feel the love? Even though we're not together, I can feel the love. I still feel like we together. Do you feel the love? Even at our social distance, I can feel the love. Yeah, yeah.
Baby, I believe we can make a change. We did it when we had to. Now let's try to maintain.
Now let's try to maintain.
So when we go outside, the sunshine turn to rain.
Yeah.
Instead of taking a drive, I might hop on a train. Yeah. When we get together, we can do amazing things. Yeah. It took isolation just so we can change some things. Yeah. So now we know we're capable of rearranging things. It's crazy like we're in an episode of Stranger Things. Now we know what's possible. We can take on any obstacle. People laying up in a hospital. We got the earth cooling down like a popsicle. Do our best to take care of our planet and not take it for granted. And we're here to spread a message so people can understand it. I believe.
Just sing from just one small change. And I know that we can make it. We will breathe again. Our hopelessness will disappear when we show this earth we care. Now make this promise, here will be. Promise me that you believe. I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe. Do you believe? I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe. 'Cause I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe.
Okay, yes. All my Third Rock friends, if you love the planet, I want you to put your hands in the air like this and go crazy. I want you to have some fun with me. I want you to party with me. Let's have some fun. Let's go.
We gotta love
our world. All
of the boys and
the
girls.
All of the girls.
We gotta save
the
water. All we need,
all that we need
is our love. I know that it's enough.
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 We can make this happen with me and you. I know that we can do better. All about coming together. Hands in the air, you're doing your part. Hands in the air, you're doing your part. Hands in the air, you're doing your part. Hands in the air, you're doing your part.
On this song, I clap my hands real hard. I know I'm doing my part. I know I'm doing my part. And when I hear this song, I put my hands up in the air. I know I'm doing my share. I know I'm doing my share.
You're doing your part. We all depend on each other. True. Stronger when we are together. True. One person that you can count on me. One person that I can count on you. We all make one little change. We can go further in range. One person can make a difference. Saving the world is the mission. And you can be heroes today. Saving the planet from waste. Reduce, reuse, and recycle. That put a smile on my face. We can make this happen with me and you. I know that we can do better. All about coming together. So, hands in the air, you're doing your part. Hands in the air, you're doing your part. Hands in the air, you're